We are live.
Thank you. Good evening, the October 19th,
I have everybody
2021.
breaking up. I'm going to go out and come back in.
Okay. Good evening, the October 19th, 2021 special meeting of the West Hartford Town Plan and Zoning Commission and duly designated Inland Wetlands and Watercourses Agency is called to order. My name is Kevin Ahern. I'm chair of the Town Plan and Zoning Commission, and I'd like to welcome you to tonight's virtual meeting. For the record, I'd like to note that the required meeting agenda and application materials are all available on the town website. This meeting is being conducted in virtual format in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act as amended by Public Act number 21.2, which authorizes municipalities to conduct public meetings virtually. Will the town planner please call the roll?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Prestige.
Here.
Mr. Kaplan.
Here.
Mr. Binkhurst.
Here.
Mr. Ahern.
Here.
And for the record, we did have Commissioner Gillette. She was experiencing a technical difficulty. I'll make note of record when she pops back on the meeting. For staff, Mr. Chairman, myself, Todd DeMay, Town Planner, Designated Wetland Agent. Also present are Brian Pudlick, Associate Planner, and Rob Goslin, Planning and Zoning Technician. That is the roll.
Thank you, Mr. DeMay. For the record, I'd like to note that with or without Commissioner Gillette, we have a quorum of the commission tonight. Commission members and town staff are participating by WebEx. Members of the public can view the meeting live on West Hartford Community Television at www.whtv.org and also www.youtube/WHCTV5, the number 5. The meeting is also being recorded for on-demand viewing and will be available on the town's website for at least 45 days. Because of the virtual format of this meeting, there are some special rules and procedures that I need to cover before I begin. First, I ask all participants to mute your device when you are not speaking. If you wish to be recognized, please raise your hand and I will call on you in the order that I see hands raised at the appropriate point in the meeting. If you are participating by audio only, or I do not call on you and the debate is ending, then unmute your phone or device and let me know so I can recognize you. Second, all speakers must make a good faith effort to state the person's name and title at the outset of each occasion that such person participates in the meeting. With that, will the town planner please proceed with the matters on our agenda?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I do, I would like to note for the record, we do have Commissioner Gillette has joined us again.
Welcome, Liz.
So the first and only item on this evening's agenda is a townwide sewer easement clearing project, as of right determination request by the Metropolitan District Commission for vegetation clearing within 11 to 12 miles of existing sewer easement areas. It was submitted for agency receipt at our September 8th meeting. Discussion, presentation, and determination for this request was rescheduled to this special meeting on October 19th. Before I turn over to the representatives from the MDC, I just wanted to discuss the relatively unique request before the Wetland Agency. In the roughly 9 years that I've been with the town, you as an agency have not received this request. So I thought it important to kind of review our wetland regulations and see where our authority lies and comes from. So if we look at Section 4 of our Inland Wetland and Watercourse Regulations, which is titled Permitted Uses as of Right and Non-Regulated Uses. Section 4.1 outlines 9 different uses. They're each specified and they're either operations or uses, and they're all defined as permitted in an inland wetland and watercourse area, so-called as of right. The use that we're going to be discussing and hearing tonight from the MDC broadly would fall under use or category H, which is the maintenance related to any drainage pipe, which existed before July 1st, 1974, provided that such pipe is on property which is zoned as residential, but which does not contain hydrophytic vegetation. For purposes of subsection, maintenance means the removal of accumulated leaves, soil, and other debris, whether by hand or machine, while the pipe remains in place. It's worth pointing out for the agency, there's another section of uses that fall under uses that are also considered non-regulated uses. That does not apply this evening. And then importantly, in section 4.4, our regulations specify, and I'll read, to carry out the purposes of this section, any person proposing to carry out a permitted or non-regulated operation or use prior to the commencement of such operation or use shall notify the agency on a form provided by it and provide the agency with sufficient information to enable it to properly determine that the proposed operation and use is a permitted or non-regulated use of the wetland or watercourses. The agency shall rule on the proposed operation or use, whether it's permitted or non-regulated, or shall note if a permit is required. Such ruling is required to be provided in writing and may no later than the next regularly scheduled meeting following the meeting at which the request was received and closed. If the agency finds that the proposed use or activity does not represent any regulated use or operation as defined by this subsection, no application or permit for activities will be required. If the agency ruling may be subject to limitation or revocation if it is later shown that the proposed operation or use results in a regulated activity. So again, this is relatively rare, but there are certain classes of uses throughout town or activities that do fall under anyone in the community's right to apply for your determination. And that's what we're here tonight to hear from the MDC. So I'm going to turn it over to, I believe, Mr. Waterbury from the MDC, who's going to go through a presentation of the information that you should have received in your packets preceding this meeting.
Thank you, Todd. Chris, I don't know if you wanted to do an introduction or not.
Sure. Yeah, definitely, Jason.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Todd and Kevin and the rest of the commission, thank you very much for allowing MDC to come in here tonight and speak on our project. I know Jason's going to go through his presentation. I do just want to mention that probably a sort of atypical of what you may see on some utility clearings, that whether it be gas pipelines or electrical high tension wires. This is it's a very manual clearing exercise that we do, and we've had great success in other towns. And it just sort of jogged my memory. I want to say about 8 years ago or so, we did a clearing project. Actually, our same contractor, Lavoie Horticulture, did a project around our West Hartford and Reservoir 6 property lines. We worked in some fairly nice neighborhoods around Sunset Meadows area, and we had to do some clearing to open up our basically our border around our security fence, as well as open up some area around of our infrastructure too. So we were able to work in conjunction with our abutting property owners, neighbors, the residents of West Hartford. And as Jason will go through, it was a very similar notification process that we had there. But we did have some very good success. And I think it was probably in conjunction, I think it was Catherine DeRoe at the time we worked with, and we had a great relationship with the town of West Hartford to execute that project. So I just want to thank the group again, and I'll turn it over to Jason. Thanks.
Thank you, Chris. All right, I'm going to try to share my presentation here. Let's see here. Working on a laptop, but used to working on like a double monitor. So, okay. Thank you, Commission, for hearing us tonight. Todd, thank you for working with us for the last couple of weeks, actually probably months now on this. As Todd said, the reason we're here is to seek a determination from the town as to whether or not the proposed activities are, regulated activities in the town's inland wetlands or upland review area. In speaking with Todd, we're aware that there may be additional information required, such as, planning and zoning, or more specifically zoning information, which you referenced by the residential comment, or hydrophytic vegetation. I do believe that we actually have probably a good amount of that information. Going back about 5 years, we actually initially started looking at this for this type of task with the onset, or with the goal of building access roads to our sewers. We quickly realized that was going to be a much more expensive and laborious endeavor. So we actually took a different approach. But while we were going down that path, we did have wetland scientists actually evaluate all of our easements throughout our 8-member towns. So I did send Todd that report, in addition to, I think, the federal forms, federal wetland forms that our soil scientists had done. I have to work with him and RGS folks to better match that up with the mapping that we provided now, because the areas aren't really named the same, just to show the information on an apples to apples level. But that being said, if there's any other information after tonight you guys feel you need, we'll work with you and get that information and update our maps. So just going ahead with the presentation, I just want to, my little window for screen is like blocking part of my text here. Here we go. On the screen is the agenda for tonight. We're gonna go through what exactly the collection system in West Hartford contains, why we're doing this program, and then how the scope of this work actually typically proceeds. So the MDC's collection system in West Hartford is very unique actually within the 8-member towns. West Hartford is, I'll put in quotes, the youngest member town. West Hartford joined the MDC in 1984. The majority of the sewers within the town of West Hartford were actually built by the town of West Hartford and not the MDC. Actually, on the screen, you can see 192 of the 223 miles of sewer were built by the town. It does actually complicate things for easements and whatnot, because we rely on the easement records that the town had and the town would have conveyed to us. Within the town, there's 19 miles of sewers that are considered as easement sewers. That does not mean we need to clear 19 miles. We need to clear roughly 11 miles to get access to the 19 miles. Of that 19, 16 were installed by the town. And then just some statistics. I did this in age brackets of decade, so it was a little bit easier with our GIS, but 86% of the sewers were installed before 1979, and of those sewers are primarily PVC, concrete, and clay. So the map on your screen now, just kind of pictorially represent it. The red lines are the sewers that were installed by the town of West Hartford. The green lines are the sewers that were installed by the MDC. Just kind of graphically shows you the extent of how much of the collection system was actually built by the town. The reason we're doing this is actually goes back to our consent decree. So as part of our consent decree, the district had to come up with a CMOM program, and it stands for Capacity Management Operations and Maintenance. And the main objective of a CMOM program is to force municipalities to develop programs that come up with maintenance systems or maintenance programs to mitigate or reduce or eliminate sanitary sewer overflows. The APA does not want municipalities or sewer authorities to have a sanitary sewer overflow, and the reason being that there was a root blockage in the middle of the pipe that routine maintenance would have picked up. Additionally, one other requirement of the CMOM program in our consent decree is to identify inflow and infiltration sources, and then go ahead and move forward with getting those sources of extra water out of the pipe. For those who are not familiar with sewer systems, inflow and infiltration is basically clean water that enters the sewer system. Infiltration is typically comes in through leaky pipes or manholes, and inflow is typically a connected pipe that's not supposed to be there, like a catch basin or some pump or a roof leader. And in 7 of our 8-member towns, the sewer system is considered a separated system, so that's why those sources would not be allowed. Typical CMOM activities that the district proceeds with are CCTV inspection, manhole inspections, sewer cleaning, and sewer lining. The sewer lining is obviously the last of any of these activities. It's something that we would do based on the 3 previous items on there as far as what was recommended. To date, we've inspected roughly 92% of our collection system, and that's basically everything within the public right-of-way in our 8-member towns. About 8% of the sewers remaining are in cross-country areas. Or sorry, the remaining 8% is the sewers that are in cross-country areas. And of that, about 7 miles of easement sewers in West Hartford have not been inspected. So even though there's 19 that I said on my prior screen, there's some that we can get to from roadway or from like parking lots, which are still considered an easement sewer. So it's really those last 7 miles that's kind of critical. Going forward here, we have started this program. We actually started the easement clearing project in the town of Bloomfield. We've completed the majority of that work. We did about 97,000 feet. We then moved into East Hartford, and we're nearing completion there. We expect to wrap up this fall. We also started Rocky Hill very recently, and then we plan on going into Windsor and West Hartford next. And as you can see on the screen, it's not an easy task. We're trying to clear roughly 109 miles of sewer within our 8-member towns. So on the screen here, you have your typical before and after pictures. And honestly, the before pictures on the left, I could have taken any pictures of the woods and told you it was a sewer easement, because that's basically what they all look like. In most cases, you can't tell there's a sewer there. In most cases, people probably don't even know there's a sewer there. However, it doesn't prevent us from needing to get back there and access and maintain our sewer system and inspect our sewer system. So, and then on the right, you see, or actually, sorry, in the middle, you see what the activities typically entail, and I'll go into description on this on another slide, but it's mostly hand tools, like weed whackers, chainsaws, machetes, that type of stuff that we use to clear these easements. And then the picture on the right is right after seeding was done, we put in a low maintenance grass in our easement areas, with the goal being that grass eventually chokes out the invasives and other high growth vegetation that would prevent us from getting into our sewer system, getting access to our sewer easements. So like I said early on, we initially were going to go down the path of building access roads so that we can use our traditional equipment to get to these sewers. When we quickly realized that this was not going to be an easy task and not going to be very cost effective, we then investigated and eventually purchased a UTV vehicle, much like the one on the screen on the picture, where that was fitted out with our sewer inspection or CCTV equipment. And we began using that in 2019. So the reason we went with this approach is that it required a much smaller footprint and less impact to the areas we're working in. So instead of installing a gravel access road to gain access to these easements, we can use the UTV, and basically, as long as it's clear and you can get a UTV through, we can inspect our sewer system. The only issue that we've come across is in some areas there's still some stream crossings which we can't get to, and we're going to look at those on a case-by-case basis. So this is a typical map that we give to our contractor to start his planning process for easement clearing. On the screen, north is actually to the left. Just for reference, Trout Brook Drive is kind of like through the center. I don't know if you can see my cursor. This is Trout Brook Drive. And this is actually the confluence of Trout Brook. So this is the main branch of Trout Brook, and this is, I think, considered the northern branch of Trout Brook. And then this is Montclair Drive over here, if you guys can see my cursor. So when we give this map to our clearing contractor, the yellow represents the easements that we want him to clear or gain access to. So in some cases, it goes across a lawn and there's no clearing, but for the purposes of GIS tracking, we're still trying to get access to that sewer. The hatched blue lines represent the 100-year flood. If there was any possible hits for an endangered or threatened species on the natural diversity database, they would be noted in like a purple hatching. There's also wetlands that we take from the town's GIS wetland database. I believe that's where it comes from. Our GIS staff and work with the town staff on that. And then we have a layer for critical wildlife habitats. I believe that's pretty much similar to the wetland areas also. So this is the information that our contractor is given, and then he's got to come up with a work plan, which I'll describe on another page. So the first step is that the district sends out notifications to all property owners and abutters of the easement work. And this is done typically several months in advance of the actual clearing work. And the reason for that being that district personnel have to go out and survey and flag the sewer manhole. So that way our clearing contractor knows where he's going when he gets in there. Once that surveying task is done, the clearing contractor can go in and come up with his work plan, which is called an assessment. And on that work plan, what it tells the district when he submits it to us is where is he going to access the areas from? What type of properties is he working? Are they commercial? Are they residential? Are they town owned? Are there any stream crossings? Any unique features that we have to be aware of, like fences across an easement or extremely steep grades that would really hinder some of the work? Quantities of larger trees, 12-inch and larger. We've actually seen trees in some areas up to 36-inch or 48-inch. And then how long he expects to be working in a given area, his duration of work. And then once the work gets close to being scheduled, we then provide door hangers to our contractor inspection staff, and they hang that on the property owners' properties, just giving them a heads up that the work is coming within the next week or two. The contractor then goes in and starts his clearing work, and it's like Kristen said, it's very low impact. It's primarily hand clearing. We don't really use any equipment. It's not a logging operation by any means. It's hand clearing. They work in any weather, which God bless them. They're in there when it's pouring rain. And the only equipment that we do bring in is a small machine for chipping or stump grinding, which would either be a walk behind or pulled by a small UTV. But we will only use that in areas that are on the drier side where there's no risk of the equipment getting stuck. If we can't bring that equipment in, then they flush cut the stumps with a chainsaw. And the only reason for doing that is just so that in the future, when we're doing any mowing or maintenance of these easements, our mowing crews don't have any risk of hitting a random uncut stump, and because that would do some damage and potentially injure our staff. And then once all that is done, depending on the season, there's seeding and herbicide applications that are done. The seeding is obviously in the spring or in the fall, and the herbicide is typically in small windows between August and September, and it's very species specific. Our clearing contractor, Mark Lavoie, is on the phone, so if there are questions about herbicides, he can answer that. He is a licensed herbicide contractor by the state of Connecticut and knows far more about herbicide applications than I do. And then just the last slide here is some example outreach notifications. We send one letter to either the property owner or the abutter, and this is just giving them notice that we're going to be doing this work. And then on the right-hand side is the door hanger. And now, actually, one thing I didn't mention is if by chance the work gets delayed substantially, we will actually send out another notice, just because we know people do kind of either forget or throw out notices like this sometimes. And that is actually the end of the presentation. So I'm going to unshare my screen for now. And I'll mute myself, Todd.
Thank you. This is Kevin Ahern, Chair. So just to be clear, you're finished with your presentation, right? Before I start heading. Okay. Before I go to questions from the commissioners, and Todd, you don't need to say anything, but I just figured if you have anything to add or anything that you think we might need before we start asking questions, you can throw it in now, or just throw in while we ask questions.
Proceed with the commission's questions, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. So let me check with the commission then. Does anyone have questions? Mr. Lett.
I'm assuming, but would like to hear from you. Well, one, how wide are the paths you're cutting? Is it 12 to 15 feet in the 20-foot right of way?
Yes, that's correct.
Why can't it be 10?
Because we need at least 12 to 15 feet, so that way when the UTV is used, we have room to turn it around if we have to.
And you can't do that in sort of little laybys or
No,
anything
because
like that?
without really planning the work that far ahead, I mean, we're talking about 109 miles of easements. We're trying to be consistent for our crews. The easements themselves are up to 20 feet wide. So we're not looking to create turnarounds now because we can't say, okay, this is exactly where the machine's going to have to turn around.
My next question is, and it's mainly to get some of this on the record, but what precautions, a lot of what you're doing is alongside intermittent waterways, small brooks, streams, etc. What do you do in terms, I mean, things that we would spend a lot of time as an inland wetlands commission finding out how you protect those waterways? Could you discuss what your methods for that are?
Yes, I mean, one of the biggest concerns that we've seen in doing this work is, flooding or jamming up water courses with debris. So the debris is typically stockpiled in kind of, for lack of a better term, cocoons that DEP forestry kind of prefers us to do, and it's a habitat type of thing. But that's put on the upland side of the easement area. We don't want to store or chip into a wetland, or leave debris into a wetland, or do anything that would cause any kind of flooding.
I'm concerned with runoff into the water courses, into the wetlands from the work that you do. And just by the disturbing of dirt and by the elimination of vegetation.
Well, we're not cutting any soils or filling. The disturbance of dirt it should be minimal, because we're not even removing stumps.
But you do reseed, and the after picture shows an awful lot of dirt. If you were a homeowner doing this, we'd want to hear about the hay bales. We'd want to hear about the landscape fabric. We'd want to hear exactly where the stockpiles were and how soon they're going to be eliminated or incorporated into the site. Now, clearly going through all of these maps and doing it for each map is perhaps not practical, but I'm not hearing from you that, well, I'm not hearing from you, frankly, that you're taking the kind of care and attention to protect the waterways that we would demand of the homeowners and of ourselves were this kind of clear cutting to be taking place so close to streams. That's a little concerning.
And typically we don't show that information on the maps. I mean, if there's an area that we're cutting right up against a wetland, which in some cases we actually avoid areas of cutting if there's standing water. We're obviously not going to be cutting in those types of areas. But if there's an area where it looks like to be an erosion concern, we will or can have our clearing contractor put in silt fence or hay bales. There's actually details and payment items for his work in there. We don't identify that ahead of time on the maps because we haven't cleared these areas. So we don't even know what these areas really look like yet.
So you do the work and then find out whether it's damaging to the water courses.
I wouldn't necessarily characterize it like that. I'm saying is, unlike a lot of your typical applications that you see, you've got a site plan where you've got a survey of the area, and you're clearing, horizontally larger swaths. In corridor type work, we're basing all of our plans on GIS aerial based mapping. So it's really not practical to on that type of mapping say this is where a silt fence is going to go.
Well, I had thought maybe there was a policy or a protocol when you did this concerning these things, where when you are within 20 feet of a water course, as a matter of course, you protect it. I'm not hearing that. And I understand you've got a huge area here that you've got to deal with. And I guess I'm just a little concerned because, as I say, were you a private homeowner, that wouldn't fly. And our concern as a water course, as the inland wetlands, is to protect those water courses. I wish there was more detail on that.
Yeah,
We
Mr.
can- I
Leb,
mean,
sorry, this is Chris Levesque, CEO of the MDC. I would say Jason's had these back in really tight communication with, I'll be specific with East Hartford, where we brought their agent and, believe it or not, their person from DPW to support us as we went through different areas. As we began clearing and opened them up, we got the feedback from the town of East Hartford on what they would like to exactly see. So I would think that would be a good opportunity for us to do something similar, potentially with Todd, as we start opening these sites up. To your point, we get a better feel, and if there's an area that we have silt fence required, we have the pay items. We can pay our contractor to put it in, but it's sort of going to be on a case-to-case basis, and I'd like to definitely have that communication with the town as we open these areas up to prescribe those and address those issues that someone like Todd experience knows what to do in those areas. He could instruct us. Yes, put silt fence here. We need to protect this area. I think that's a good point. And if you're okay with that, we can have that similar relationship we had with East Hartford.
I think at a bare minimum, that is, that's good. Thank you.
You got it.
This is Kevin Ahern, Chair. Do we have any other questions from the commission? Mr. Bressage. And then after that, Mr. Kaplan.
Sure. Good evening. Jason, thanks everyone for your time and presentation tonight. Just want to begin by saying, there certainly is a partnership between, West Hartford and the MDC for lots of different things, whether it's the MDC property on town or just the fact that you guys, provide, all the folks in town, like myself, the schools, everybody, water, and take care of, the sewer too, and really appreciate that. That said, we just want to take the opportunity tonight to take a narrow look at this one task in front of us, and try to see how it fits inside. At least right now, to me, it looks like where does this fit within West Hartford's wetland regulations? So when I think of this, and I think of this as a maintenance activities, is it possibly? I'm not too sure, but I would say that from what I understand of them, there's a number of things that I have questions about. So let me get into some specific questions about this. You had mentioned earlier, I believe you had mentioned earlier, that you had wetland mapping performed in the town along
Yes.
your rights of way or the easements or whatever it is they might have. Okay, and that's something, would that be able to define the limits of hydrophytic vegetation?
I believe so. I mean, I have been working with Todd over the last day or two on this. I need to actually go through that report and digest it better, because the way the report was structured, it was done, I think, on 6 or 7 areas of the town, but they were much larger easement, like parcels or packages together. I have to take that information and see if it covers everything we've submitted to you. Make sure there's no easements that were left out. But it did characterize the limits of wetlands within those 6 or 8 areas within the town of West Hartford. So yes, to answer your question, we did have that done. That was done back in 2016.
Okay. That seems to be an important component of how we evaluate this for whether, to determine if, what type of, where this falls under the town's regulations. That said, when I look at maintenance too, the actual activity of maintenance and the way it's described by the town regulations, I see maintenance described as some sort of physical activity, whether it's, mechanical. It doesn't mention anything about chemical. So could you discuss a little bit more the application of chemicals in and around wetlands?
You're talking about the herbicides, Commissioner? You're talking about the herbicide specifically? Yes.
Yeah, chemical management.
Yes. So the whole purpose of the herbicides is only for invasive species like Phragmites, knotweed, that type of vegetation, and it's prevented from coming back. If you want, I can have Mark unmute himself and he can talk about it because he knows much more about herbicides than I do. And I know we have had the conversation with other towns and as to whether or not they're safe for watercourses, and they are. They are I guess permitted, be a lack of a better term, for that type of use. Mark, can you kind of talk about the herbicide applications? Todd, do you have to unmute him? Mark, you there?
Mark, we sent you an unmute request, so you'll have to follow the prompt since you were a call-in number.
This is Mark here, unmuted. Can I be heard?
Yes, we can hear you, Mark.
Okay. In response to the question regarding herbicides, we are licensed in rights of way. I have 40 years background in these activities. The two herbicides that we would consider on an IPM approach would be triclopyr 3, which is utilized in aquifers, watersheds, drainage ditches, and so forth, has an extremely low soil toxicity as well as a very high LD50 acceptance for the operators. This particular herbicide only will be used on stump regrowth and invasive weeds. It is applied to the foliage of our unwanteds. Once we clear, we have regrowth, so we would treat the foliage as dicot weeds, woody ornamentals, primarily invasives. It would be translocated to the roots, and we would be able to maintain a grassland corridor, minimizing future maintenance and cutting. The other product is a water-safe glyphosate. Typically, the label in Connecticut is rodeo. This would be used on Phragmites as well as Japanese knotweed. And again, this is on an IPM approach, and it's utilized in a very specific window of opportunity when we see seed heads on these two species. It is our experience that the initial approach, depending on the site, would be, again, on an IPM, within 3 years, we would simply be maintaining these corridors with mechanical maintenance, mowing, and brush cutters. Our goal is to create a low meadow. The grass species that we use are fine fescues and sheep fescues primarily. The mixes, I do own the seed company. These species are what they call allopathic. They exclude alkaloids that prevent noxious weeds from establishing a footprint. Our approach is successional, and these grass species typically grow no taller than 6 to 8 inches, require once a year mowing. If I can add, there is a question, and I don't want to get ahead of anyone, but the erosion issues. We do not disturb soil whatsoever. The base of the forest, as it were, as we move through corridors, is an extremely complex root systems of vegetation that we've cut. We've not experienced, in most cases, in almost any case, movement of soil because we don't disturb the soil, we don't drive big equipment, and we seed almost immediately upon our opportunities. So, and it is case by case, as Jason mentioned. So that's any further questions regarding chemicals, I'd be happy to discuss that.
Okay. Yeah, so I think you answered my question, which was, are you planning to use chemicals in or near wetlands? And what I heard, I believe, was yes.
Not well, no. we have limits. My license provides for an attention to well systems, exposed vernal pools. There's a variety of areas or situations that we would not use chemistry to LA the invasives. It would be mechanical only. We did take a cruise with the DEP officials regarding our approach, and we have documentation as to what they would like to see us do, which we do.
Cool. Glad you've done that with them. So I guess the answer would be, is the plan to use chemicals to maintain the rights of way? The answer is yes, and in certain cases.
That's accurate, yes.
In or near what? Okay, all right, fair enough. So that's good to know. Let's see, other questions I had. With regards to maintenance, what is the cycle of maintenance? What I'm hearing here now is that, excuse me, these rights of way, if we can just call it that, have not been maintained. It sounds as though you want to begin maintaining them, and really pleased you guys are engaging us to understand, if you're, doing it in West Hartford as one of your partners, how do we do it within kind of the scope of West Hartford's wetland regulations? So would you please confirm or correct, is this the beginning of some sort of secular maintenance? And if so, would you please describe what the future maintenance looks like?
So you are correct. This is Mark. I'll start it and then I'll let you finish with some of the finer details here. You are correct in that these areas have not been maintained, and that's not specific to West Hartford. That's across all 8 member towns. Unfortunately, we had very limited easement maintenance for going back a good amount of time. The long-term goal, like Mark said, would be to have that low growth meadow, 6 to 8 inches, that over the first couple of years of seeding, cutting, herbicide application, and maybe some subsequent herbicide application if invasives come back, and then additional seeding where need be. The game plan would be after the first 2 to 3 years of that to end up with that meadow where the only maintenance we have would be an annual mowing.
I can appreciate that. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at, if you mind me characterizing it again, I know that you're looking to follow up with more information potentially, but you're looking at a vegetation conversion project. Yeah.
Yes.
And that makes sense. You've got an asset underground, you want to make sure it's safe and operating well. I totally get that. And I can appreciate that. That said, okay. So we're talking about there's going to be immediate clearing, and then you're going to implement some sort of erosion controls as necessary, and after that, you're going to want to stabilize it and begin the conversion to a vegetative layer that is more conducive to long-term maintenance, both for making it easier and kind of safer. I would say for everybody involved. Okay, I think I get that now. So let's peel that back a little bit. So we've talked about how you're going to do it, both physical, mechanical, and chemical. The next step, I just want to touch quickly on erosion and sedimentation controls. I can appreciate that, if you've got this many linear feet, it's a challenge to design that all. It's not just, a corner parking lot and, you've got a nice set of, elevation and an engineer sitting around with a CAD tool, right? But that said, there are erosion and sedimentation controls both in the town and in the state. Who would be directing, making the determination if sediment and erosion controls are required and what sedimentation and erosion controls should be used and in what order, so on and so forth, in or near wetlands.
I think like what Chris had described, what we did in East Hartford was we worked with the local DPW staff and wetland agent in East Hartford to walk the first couple easements we were clearing to kind of like set the precedent of what was expected. And I think that would be a good approach that we would do here. Once, ourselves, our field staff and Todd and maybe the town engineer, Dwayne, had eyes on the first or second easement that was cleared, we then would understand what the expectation was and what the kind of precedent should be set that we can then implement as we continue to clear the rest of the easements.
Yeah, I think the precedent set so far right now in the town, and I'll let Todd and others speak to that, is that, it needs to be somebody that's, qualified to do that. And the other thing is I know that in a town of 60,000 plus folks, really a city, I'm not quite sure if they're staffed at this point to, spend a lot of time, going in and out. I think what I'd like to hear about more in the future is what would be the MDC's role in having a qualified staff, making those decisions. It's not to say that they wouldn't coordinate with the town. We do that. I would say, that's, if you don't know Brian, you will know him very well. He's, absolutely the best at working with applicants and developers to make sure that they're up to speed with zoning regulations, including erosion, sedimentation controls, wetland rules too. Okay, so we'd want more information on that. I can appreciate that, when you do the clearing activities, you wouldn't want to disturb the ground, but the fact of the matter is there will be some tracked and wheeled equipment, I'd imagine, and it will happen. But I just want to let you know that I can't appreciate the effort to not, kind of break soil. All right, we've got onto that. We've gone to maintenance. Now, when it comes to the width, how come we can't neck down inside wetland areas? I can appreciate the need to turn around, but it's quite common for linear facilities where when you go through certain sensitive resources that the right of way will become narrow. I mean, you don't need to turn around everywhere. There can be areas where you could have a straight, narrower strip. Is that something you guys have considered?
It's not, I guess we would have to discuss it ourselves internally and also discuss with our operations staff for the ones that are using this equipment. I can't answer that right now, Kevin. I'd have to come back and we'd have to kind of evaluate. I know the turnaround piece is a big part. I know other factors would be, growth from the sidewall, shall we say?
Yeah, totally.
Which then, even though you're saying you might want to only clear 8 feet, once you have that sidewall growth, you might be down to 6 feet or 5 feet. So
there's that critical minimum width you need to
correct.
Keep it from covering over. I understood.
So I mean, it's when we come back, I can better answer that question.
Yeah. I think that would be on trend. Sorry, go on, Kevin.
Let me jump in real quick, Kevin. This is Kevin Hernachair again, because I think one thing, and I actually think Kevin's questions are heading in this direction, but I do want to kind of focus on, because it's we see inland wetlands applications all the time, and it's easy, I think, for us to jump into this and start essentially looking at it as we normally would. But I've had to wrap my mind around the decision that we actually have to make here, which isn't our traditional inland wetlands decision, but rather a request that we don't make any inland wetland decisions at all, essentially, and that we find that this qualifies as a non-regulated use. And so I kind of want us to zoom in on that. And I want to, two things, I don't know that I've heard a direct statement as to what the MDC believes qualifies it under this application, and maybe, and again, I may have missed it in the materials, for it to receive this type of decision under Section 4 of the, I've been kind of looping through it as we've been talking, and I don't know. I mean, I don't actually know that we have enough information to make the decision, but I also don't know that I've actually heard any arguments that necessarily support it either. So two things. If there's anything else the applicant can tell us now to help us make that decision, that would be great. But I also want to direct the commissioner's questions towards that determination rather than what would be our more traditional determination. I think a lot of the questions Kevin was asking was heading in that direction. But anyway, so Kevin, let me go back to you, I guess, and then unless you want to defer to the applicant.
Sure. I mean, I'll defer to the applicant if we want to narrow it to that, Kevin. Could I ask you one other thing, Kev?
Yeah,
With
no,
regards to no, I appreciate the focusing on time and being efficient. So thank you. You're dragging me back to where we need to be. I appreciate that. Hey, with regards to information for next month, do we want to leave this all relevant to the determination of whether this falls within the scope of being a maintenance activity? All follow-up information? Sorry, I'm not being clear about that.
No, so that actually, I think, Kevin, I think you're getting to kind of the rub of my question too, is what is the basis upon which we're making this determination? So that the commission understands that it can take the facts that are placed in front of it and know exactly which section of the regulation we're going to be weighing it against. So that would be a question to the applicant.
Okay. I'm going to step back and then I'll jump back in, perhaps, Kev. Thank you.
Thank you,
Jason,
Kevin. Those were good
Yep.
questions.
Chair Hearn, can I start on this? Then I'll let Chris also chime in.
Totally up to you guys. Yes.
Okay. So, as I understand it, in the wetland regs, pipes installed in wetland areas prior to, I think, I don't have the regs in front of me. I can't do the whole dual screen thing that I usually do in my office, and I didn't print them off. Pipes installed prior to, I think it's 1972.
I'll read it right now.
Okay.
Maintenance relating to any drainage pipe which existed before July 1st, 1974, provided such type is on a property which is zoned as residential, but which does not contain hydrophytic vegetation. For purposes of this section, maintenance means the removal of accumulated leaves, soil, and other debris, whether by hand or machine, while the pipe remains in place. That's the maintenance.
Yes, and our clearing of vegetation, in our opinion, is maintenance. The sewer easement is an asset, just like the sewer itself. And like all assets any municipality has, they have to be maintained. Like we had said earlier on, obviously this maintenance hadn't been going on for quite a while. But the bottom line is the easements are an asset that the reality is the town of West Hartford paid for, that the MDC then paid for when the town joined. But that asset needs to be maintained. So that would be really the basis of it. And I think in working with other municipalities, other member towns, we've come to that same conclusion. We have done this work in Bloomfield and in East Hartford and Rocky Hill, and a wetlands permit was not required for this same work. So I think that's really what the opinion of the district would be. And Chris, I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that. Chris is also on baby duty, so he's double tasking.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Yeah, definitely. Based on the regulation that was cited, as far as our work, it's fairly minimal. No real soil disturbance. So removing a soil, that's really not. And the way we set up our vegetation management plan, we worked on it for, Jason, I don't recall, it was probably a good 12 months that we worked on that vegetation management plan to get to a point where we had a sustainable solution that was not aggressive, not going in and disturbing the rights of way, the easements that we had, but also having a sustainable approach where we're not letting the vegetation grow back in and we're bringing big mechanical equipment back into. It's more of getting it into and it's sort of I think one of the commissioners mentioned is sort of a regeneration of new vegetation stabilizing the area. So that's sort of what we focused on there. So yes, we're applying that regulation. Also, we're and this is just some of my experience that I used to manage our water supply facilities and all of the acreages that we have. We're the second largest landowner in Connecticut. So we did have an exempt activity, the timber harvesting that was outside of the regulation. But what I always suggested was that we always go to, whether it be Barkhamsted, Heartland, New Hartford's Inland Wetlands Commission, just to present the project, get the feedback from the public as well as the commission. But knowing that it is a exempt activity, and knowing that we're not harvesting timber, so I don't want you to I don't want to try to come off that we're harvesting timber or applying this regulation exemption to our activity. But I would say it's definitely less invasive than some of our timber harvesting activities that we do on our watershed, which we do for actually water quality management and forestry management. So I did want to mention that, and that was part of the basis of our discussions with other towns as we presented to their own Wetlands Commission as well as their town councils in the past.
Okay, this is Kevin Hurd, Chair again. Let me just jump in. I appreciate that answer, Chris. Because I mean, look, we're going to be looking at our inland wetlands regs, right? And it's, you know, it's how we make any decision, right? We go through our regs. We go, okay, this is what the regs say. This is the factual findings that we have here, and we have to put them together. So I think it's going to be important, because if I was a betting man, I'd say we're probably not going to make a decision tonight. I think there's a lot of information that we still need. So I'm going to be speaking for myself, and I think some of the other commissioners may have some more questions as well. But I'm going to need a better understanding of how this activity, not only does it meet that exemption that I just read, but how it doesn't meet, say, the other regulated activity sections, such as like 4.3, which speaks directly to clearing, cutting, you know, clear cutting, clearing, you know, things like that. I mean, I know you may not be disturbing soil, but it sounds like there's a lot of clearing going on, for instance. So, you know, I'd like a better understanding, a bit more of a walk through the, you know, the regs itself, to kind of go, all right, here's why this doesn't apply, or here's why this does apply, that kind of thing. Because that's how I'm going to go through it and make my determination. I just want to make sure you guys have the opportunity, because I don't know that I have this here in front of me. So
yeah, and Commissioner, I do appreciate that, and I know we've had the similar discussion with exemptions with our water mains as well too, within the inland wetland regulations. And I think the way we have that conversation with the municipalities we work with is essentially that the clearings associated with the pipe under the ground that we need to maintain access to for maintenance, and for also maintenance is maintenance, whether it's preventive, what we're doing, and Jason's proposing what we're doing with the CCTV and the cleaning and the lining is all preventive. But in the event that there's corrective and emergency maintenance that we have to attend to, if this pipe were ever to fail, really there's no other option other than to go in there and make a mess of the area. We'd rather be diligent and go in there in a non-emergency situation and take our time and do it right.
thank you. This is Kevin Hurd, Chair again. I think everyone here appreciates the importance of the project and the importance of the work. It's not a question of whether, it's just a question of how. And so, you know, so again, like one of the questions I'm going to need you to answer is like how the 4.1H, which is the exemption I think that MDC is going to be going for, fits within, you know, for instance, like 4.1H says, you know, for the purposes of this section, maintenance means the removal of accumulated leaves, soil, and other debris. These all sound like things that are kind of loosely on the ground, right? But what's being proposed, at least what we see here, I think, is actual cutting occurring, right? That would seem to be, so we would need an explanation why the activity proposed, you know, fits within that, for instance. Anyway, I've dominated it too much. I usually don't jump in this early. So I would like to go back to Josh Kaplan if you still have a question.
Thank you, Commissioner. I do. I have a lot of questions, but I'm going to try to keep them focused on the small scope of what we're looking at right now. I guess my first question, based on what's been said, I guess this is probably for Jason and Chris. It appears that you guys have had a soil scientist out on some of this, and based on what the regulation or wetland regulation says, I mean, have they already identified hydrophytic soils? Because it appears, looking at the maps that you guys have presented to us already, there's at least stretches of this maintenance that's going to occur right alongside, for example, sections of Westmore Park, where we already know there's wetlands and likely vernal pools right along next to those corridors. And so if we're already looking at a situation where hydrophytic soils have been identified, maybe we could, save some of this conversation. So that's the first question. I'll let you guys respond. I have others, but
Yeah, I mean, if the hydrophytic vegetation is a, I would say black and white, you have to go down the application path, then what would happen to our set of mapping is there's going to be two piles of maps, shall we say. One is, here's the areas that are high and dry, and here's the areas that, are wet, fit in the hydrophytic vegetation pile. The high and dry, we would probably be okay with, because it really wouldn't come into the purview of the commission. And then the areas where it looks like we have hydrophytic vegetation, then we would be talking to the commission about an application, provided there's no exemptions granted.
I guess, looking at all of this holistically, versus sort of breaking it down with a little bit more detail, I think is difficult for many of us in the commission, because we're seeing, so many areas that do have sensitivities, running along wetlands and water courses and through NDDB areas and through public parks. And those kinds of things I think are more of a concern. Obviously, areas that are high and dry, as you described, I don't think anybody has a greater sense of concern for what's going on in those locations. You had said earlier that there were only 7 miles of maintenance that you guys could not see from other locations and have access to. So I'm a little curious as to why you're trying to do this across all 16 to 19 miles if there's only 7 miles. And, I guess getting back to something Mr. Prestage said earlier, if you could neck down in some locations, would you be able to cut out any of those sort of more sensitive areas, particularly where hydrophytic soils were identified, if you were to reduce that scope to do only what's necessary, for what you can't currently access?
Well, actually, it has been reduced. It went from 19 to 11. The 7 is what hasn't been inspected, but what that also does include is there's some areas of the collection system that have been lined, say, 10, 15, 20 years ago. We count that as being inspected. However, that doesn't mean we don't need to go back and check it now. So it's 11 miles that we need to clear to gain access to the full 19. The EPA doesn't really care whether or not if we lined a sewer 20 years ago, we count it as, yes, we've inspected it once, but from the EPA's perspective with regards to our consent decree, we need access to it now. So we do need access to all 19 miles, and to get that, we've necked it down to 11.
All right, I appreciate those responses. I guess my last question is for Mr. Lavoie, if he can still hear me, if he's still on. I'm a little unclear still. Are you only, and I think this is important because I'm not sure pesticide use is maintenance under that definition, and in our regulations, and I guess we could have a further discussion about that. But is the intention to only use those chemicals when invasive species are identified, or is this just sort of a blanket? We're going into this assuming that we may be using these everywhere.
Todd, I think you got to unmute him.
We sent Mr. with a request, so.
Okay, I'm sorry. I am now unmuted, I hope. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Mark.
Yeah, we got you, Mark.
All right, thank you. So, products used, herbicides used are very specific to invasive plant management. The reality of what these easements have produced are corridors where pipes were put in, the land was cleared above the pipes, and we have secondary and primary growth of what we would call invasive species, much of which are on the state list, which include multiflora rose, and I could go down the list. Without getting too detailed, we cut everything first. The regrowth is a basis of legacy genetics. The legacy genetics would be existing root structure. We do not disturb the soil. The forest, what I would call duff, anything that's in the dirt, above the dirt, except for leaves, remains. We do not cross streams with equipment. We exercise handwork anywhere near we might have wet corridors. And believe me, we are walking through swamps on occasion. And the object is basically to conscientiously open the corridor. The distance of approximately 12 to 15 feet would be typical. One of the issues are the border trees. There are very large trees, the cottonwoods and other species that in 30, 40 years can grow as large as 4 feet in diameter. So we are sensitive to root invasion. There's spots where we have less concern, where there's not huge trees. At the end of the day, herbicides would be utilized to manage regrowth of unwanted species within that corridor. We don't blanket spray. The products are less toxic, certainly, than what you might find in typical lawn care companies we control. We don't use dicot, 2,4-D, MCPP, none of it. We use one particular product, which is labeled for use in wetlands, primarily for dicot control. So, you know, we could expand the discussion, but clearly we are a very sensitive green company and appreciate your concerns. We share them.
Mark, I guess just to follow up on that, you said in wet corridors you're hand clearing. So does that mean you're using these chemicals when necessary by hand, or does that mean in wet corridors, say, along wetlands, you're actually physically pulling stuff out by hand instead of using herbicides?
We are cutting with basically brush cutters with blades when we're into what we would call 2 feet of water. Typically in those corridors, it's Phragmites and other wetland species, which are on the invasive list. So we would, we hand cut. We have no mechanical equipment that we're using to cut other than chainsaws, brush cutters, and hard labor, period. You would not see there's no machines going out to these sites that have cutter blades or other invasive clearing methods. We don't produce wood chips. We do not produce any wood debris in chip form in wetlands. And we do follow the DEP guidelines, and that's basically within wetlands, there's a natural Paleolithic progression of vegetation, and trees fall over, a lot goes on, and we don't want to start cutting and creating an unnatural condition. So we could go into great detail, but I think as we evolve this discussion, we hope that we can be partners and comfortable what we're trying to get done here.
Thank you. This is Kevin Ahern, Chair again. Josh, do you have any follow-up questions?
No, I'm good for now. Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Once just Liz, if I could just hit Gordon up, he hasn't asked any questions yet, and then we'll come to you. Gordon and then Liz.
Mute myself there. So yes, I appreciate your coming before us tonight with your information. I do have several questions, and I'd like to start from the highest level. As to answer the question, is this as of right or non-regulated activity? This is a very significant project that you're proposing. You're proposing to basically clear cut 11 miles of vegetation and seed it. Our job as a commission is to be protective of our wetlands in our town. So I think your first task in your upcoming presentation is to make a much stronger case whether that you feel, as apparently you do, that this is a non-regulated activity and as of right, based on the description and verbiage that Commissioner Ahern read into the record. And I don't think that we have sufficient information at present to make that determination. I mean, I think most of the pipes are likely before 1974 and they're probably residential. But again, I'd like that affirmatively stated, and also whether or not which parts do contain hydrophytic vegetation, which is again is part of this exemption. I've heard a lot of testimony about slogging through water, using sprays to control Phragmites for weed control, which is a hydrophytic vegetation. So clearly you are planning on doing work in areas that contain hydrophytic vegetation. Further, I just would like to point out that maintenance, as Commissioner Ahern indicated as well, removal of accumulated leaves, soil, and other debris, none of which mentions clear cutting. I use the term loosely. So again, I think the first task before you as the MDC is to demonstrate that in fact this is a non-regulated activities that you're proposing. In cases where it is not non-regulated, it's not a double negative, but where it does come under our regulations, not just the ones that were read into the record, I think you need to have a plan for addressing soil and erosion control measures, not as a come as you find it method and call Brian or Todd to come out and take a quick look, but to hire perhaps an independent consulting company to come up with a definitive plan of inspection and a prospective soil and erosion control measures that you plan to employ where warranted. Part of our wetlands regulations require you to look at prudent alternatives. And I think that would include making a less wide swath across town. I don't know how long your inspection materials are. You know, some of these manholes are 30, 40, 50 feet apart. Some of them are 400 feet apart. I don't know that you need to get to every one of them. Of course, you know, I understand your desire to have a nice 15-foot wide path you can drive literally a tractor trailer down, but is that necessary? Clearly, some of the areas you're working on or go through, you know, wetlands and across Wampanoag Country Club and other areas that are considered very sensitive. So again, I'm just trying to speak to our duty as a commission to be protective of the wetlands. So I'd like to see a lot more affirmative information to help us make that decision in a credible fashion.
Thank you, Gordon. And you've given us, I mean, obviously there's a lot of stuff we're going to be coming back for, and I'm writing down all the questions so I can best respond to them when we come back. But one clarification I did want to make, our TV equipment, the camera lines typically go I want to say roughly 800 feet from the launch point, but that doesn't necessarily mean you can do 800 feet of sewer inspections. If you have a sewer line that's typically 300 feet long, you're going to have two segments, maybe 600 feet. However, if that midpoint manhole is a drop manhole, which is it's pretty frequent in a lot of these easement areas, we actually have to launch from that manhole also. So even though we can come back and say that the inspection equipment is 800 to 600 feet long, there's a lot of reasons why we would need to get to each manhole. You have those situations. We also cannot predict whether or not there is roots or debris within the middle of a pipe, and we would need to get to the opposite end of the manhole, whether it's upstream or downstream, to launch from the opposite side. So that is why we're taking the approach, and that's why EPA kind of dictates the approach to get to every single structure. However, we will assess whether or not the widths can be less, but the 11 miles isn't gonna really can't be investigated to be reduced for those reasons.
Okay, thank you. And just one further point, which I think would just help understand the necessity of this, and I do appreciate the consent order, et cetera, but your application certainly talks about inspection, but it is really also maintenance and replacement lining, whatever, that would be required for certain stretches. And towards that end, it may help your application if you indicate of all of the miles that you inspect on a routine basis. I'm not quite sure what routine actually means, but what percentage of pipe requires some type of maintenance, be it root removal, lining, etc., just to give a sense or a sense of the necessity of this work, I think would benefit you.
Yeah, and those are numbers I can come up with. I do want to make it clear though, even though the lining was referenced as a maintenance activity, if lining is recommended, it would not be handled via whatever the outcome of this decision is. We would have to come back with a separate application to do that work. So I don't want the lining to be perceived as being part of what we're calling maintenance activities for this clearing work.
Duly noted. Thank you.
And just this is Kevin Hearn, Chair again, following up, and we'll get to Liz. And then I would note then, please make sure to make that clear if you don't think it's already clear in the application. To differentiate, we're going to do this, but if it gets to this, then we understand that does not cover the scope of the request that we're making today.
Correct.
Okay.
And Kevin, just so you know, the reason being is lining is very site specific. There's a lot of engineering that would go into how a lining contractor would get in there, and what we're doing probably would not substantiate that type of access. In some cases it might, in most cases it probably wouldn't. So that's why we're not trying to confuse those two right now.
And Jason, this is Chris Levesque again with the MDC. I would also offer us include that based on what Jason said, that the lining is not included in this application, is we may have to go in and repair a pipe that we identify through this inspection prior to doing the lining. So we may have to cut out a piece of pipe if that pipe failed. And then those activities would come back to the commission as one larger scope of understanding of what we have to do the rehab of these pipes.
Thank you. This is Kevin Hearn, Chair again. All right, so then we'll go to Liz Gillette, please.
Thank you. I just want to say I understand the constraints you're under, particularly because we're the one of 8 towns and you have to do this everywhere. And there's an economy of scale involved here. What I have a problem with is the dichotomy between, for instance, and this is just an example, on page 22, there's a section of Hamilton Avenue, which is right next to Hamilton Avenue, which is a street that is essentially a muse, if you will. And the thought of you cutting back 15 feet right along the edge of the road so that you could get to 3 manhole covers that are approximately 300 feet apart, as opposed to clearing the manhole cover and taking a look before you took all that vegetation, which is part of the value of their property down. So you say site specific, but we aren't getting specific sites. And then I look over at the line that runs right through Mooney's Woods, which is swamp. And it is part of the feeder of Trout Brook from Spicebush Swamp that we raked over the coals just so that they could dredge the pond. And you're going to cut an alleyway through there, which, by the way, tangentially does hit the back of a house that we had come back 4 or 5 times before we would allow them to build a pool. That's my problem. And then you've got areas where clearly you're just going across people's backyards, and from the maps, there isn't a tree in sight, and it's no problem. And I don't have any sense really of, is it 11 miles of going through Mooney's Woods, which, believe me, if it could stand human habitation, we would have built on it already because it's right near the center. And how much of it is just through people's yards? So I have a real problem of sitting back and saying, oh yeah, this is great, when the two ends are so different. And I do have to tell you, and I know this may be unfair, I know there was a problem in Mozart Woods, and I understand that that was one of those emergency repairs. That's a horror story. That was a beautiful area that is now ruined. And in an area of town where that's important. And we lived through the complaints from the clear cutting and the trimming that went on along Trout Brook because of flood control that the MDC was in charge of. And that was a mess.
Actually, the Trout Brook clearing was DEP, not MDC.
So they told us you were involved in it, but okay, fine. But all right, I'll just go with plain government agencies then. I'm very, very gun shy of saying, oh, well, that'll work out okay. And you know, that's me in some of our past experience. I'm looking at these maps and I'm seeing such a range of different situations. I understand economies of scale. You can't be expected to, you know, fine tooth comb everything, but that's what we would expect anybody else to do. I'm very leery of some of these 15-foot paths from Mountain Road through Spicebush Swamp all the way to the back of Old Mill Lane. And then through Mooney's Woods. I'm very leery. And there's no topography on your map, so it's very difficult.
Before you address that, this is Kevin Chair again. Before you address that, I just Todd had something, so I think it'd be good to have him jump in first.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think we heard a lot of good questions and comments, and I think Commissioner Binkhorst summed it up best in terms of the specific information that the agency requires to go forward under the current request under Section 4 of our wetland regulations. My suggestion, Mr. Chairman, is Mr. Waterbury knows he has to put together some more information to address those. Absent any other specific information that would help us further pinpoint the items that Mr. Binkhorst already raised, my suggestion is we kind of end the meeting shortly and allow staff to work with the MDC. Before we do so, talk about when we'd like to have the MDC back for an additional presentation while they're here and have the ability to weigh in. Our next meeting is November 3rd, which is a Wednesday. I don't know if that gives them enough time to prepare the information required and discussed this evening. If it's not November 3rd, the next meeting after that is December 6th, which is the regularly occurring Monday, December. So.
Thank you, Todd. Two things. I mean, just throwing in, I think I would prefer December. I don't want you to have to rush this. This is a very big and important project. As long
Yeah,
as that-
November 3rd would probably be an aggressive turnaround.
Yeah.
The one thing I was going to say, just to respond to Commissioner Gillette, the Mozart is actually a really good example. Not from a perspective of ruining an area, but from the perspective of we happen just to find that failed section of sewer. It's had that sewer been inspected ahead of time, it could have been lined before it collapsed. It was a routine site walk that was being done because of issues we were seeing in the collection system that led us to identifying that as a problem, and then eventually lead to an emergency repair. The work we're trying to do here, which I know you guys can all appreciate, is to try to inspect our collection, the remainder of the collection system, to avoid those types of situations, so that we're not in an emergency manner digging up in the middle of the woods. Because the reality is, you know, if a sewer fails in Mooney's Woods, and there was a backup, we would be in there fixing it. And we're trying to do this in the least impactful way by getting there with, you know, lesser inspection equipment and identifying where our problems are before they become major problems.
Thank you, Mr. Waterbury. This is Kevin Hearn, Chair again. Yeah, I think we definitely all appreciate the desire to avoid something like the Mozart situation. So in terms of what Todd has proposed, I want to make sure, first of all, that the commissioners feel like they've been sufficiently heard tonight. And I don't want to, you know, stop, you know, if we see questions that are valuable for tonight, but it looks like we're heading towards a second meeting. Todd, can I ask you, I assume the answer is yes, but I want to make sure I understand. If all of a sudden, like tomorrow, I think, oh damn, I wish I had told them, hey, we need this. It's appropriate for me to email you and just say, hey, listen, could you also tell them this? Is that okay?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, that's okay, since this is an open hearing, open meeting, and not a public hearing. As long as you're communicating technical requests or questions through staff, we can communicate those directly to the applicant so they can bring them back during the next public meeting.
All right, because that's sometimes with me, like I'll go through a whole meeting and then like the next day, all of a sudden 3 questions will pop up into my head, and I think this is the perfect opportunity to do that. Ms. Gillette.
I do have a quick question. Having talked with our director of public works at the time of Mozart Woods, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's a I don't know if it's a regulation or an ordinance or whatever it is, that when a utility when they take down trees, they have to, if they cannot replace the tree in that place, they have to provide a replacement vegetation to be planted elsewhere. And when that was addressed in Mooney's Woods, the answer was no, because it was maintenance and an emergency. So if you're cutting down trees along this project, I'm assuming we won't be able to get you to donate trees for somewhere else. And
we'd have to discuss that. We'd have to discuss that. We haven't been asked to do that. Yeah, we have not been asked to do that, nor I wasn't aware of that regulation. So if that is true, we'll have to discuss it and have to figure out how budgetarily we would pull that off. Obviously, any of the costs that we do just get passed along.
I think you were, because it was maintenance, it didn't count, but
yeah.
I will pursue
Todd,
it.
Question for you regarding
the name of trees.
Thank you, Liz.
Todd, question for you. You said the next meeting would be December, well, other than November, would be December 6th, I think it is.
That is correct.
Okay. Would we be the only item on the agenda, seeing we've been talking for an hour and a half on this, or would we?
Not likely. That would be our regularly scheduled December meeting date. I wouldn't know what other items would appear on that general agenda until the middle of next month. However, I could work with the commission about either starting early or putting you first on the agenda. in front of other items.
Okay. So do we have anything else for today's meeting? Any questions for the applicant or anything? Okay. You guys don't need to, do you guys have anything that you need to share with us further tonight? And speaking to the applicants, I mean.
No, just thank you for hearing us. Chris, you have anything you want to say?
No, thank you very much, everyone. And I did just want to offer that what we've done in the past with other towns is meet with their town council as well. Going through the Inland Wetlands Commission, just to present as well, because I know Commissioner Gillette did bring up the issue that occurred on Trout Brook, where Deep went in and gave no notification to the residents of West Hartford and just started cutting trees down. That is not what we're looking for to do out in West Hartford. So, I think that's going to hopefully go a long way in communicating how we communicate with your residents, our customers, on when we do these activities in the future, following your approval, that we have that we get their blessing as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Levesque. Any other comments before we? All right. So then that I would ask the commissioners then for a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second that.
Thank you, Mr. Bickhorst. Okay, the motion's on the table. It's not one that we can have discussion on, so let me try your minds. All those in favor, raise your hands and say aye.
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 All right. There we go. There are no nays. And then with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.